Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Adrienne, and I'm a research assistant here at the Global Taiwan Institute. Global Taiwan Institute is a 501c3 think tank dedicated to insightful, cutting-edge, and inclusive research on policy issues regarding Taiwan and the world. GTI's mission is to enhance the relationship between Taiwan and other countries, especially the United States, through policy research and programs that promote better public understanding about Taiwan and its people. To realize the vision and mission of GTI, the starting lineup of programs include the Global Taiwan Brief, a bi-weekly publication offering expert analysis on issues related to Taiwan policy, U.S.-Taiwan relations, and Taiwan-China ties using primary materials, public seminars, regular events that address Taiwan's role in the broader policy debates with a focus on both traditional and non-traditional issues, the annual symposium, which is our flagship program, an annual symposium on U.S.-Taiwan policy. And we also host a number of podcasts, including GTI Insights, which consists of brief, timely interviews with a wide range of policy experts, including academics, government officials, and journalists. Taiwan Security Review, which explores topics related to Taiwan security, U.S.-Taiwan defense ties, and Taiwan's evolving role in the Indo-Pacific, and Taiwan Salon, our soft power and cultural policy podcast, which I'm the host of. So we're very excited to be joined today by this distinguished panel to discuss Taiwan's role in transnational human rights issues. With Taiwan's strong commitment to human rights and vibrant civil society, the island has been a leader when it comes to many global social issues. Not only is Taiwan the first Asian country to legalize gay marriage, but it also ranked within the top 20 in Freedom House's 2022 Global Freedom Scores, scoring higher than both South Korea and the United States. Taiwan has also shown an enduring commitment to human rights through continual advances to indigenous rights and NGO involvement both domestically and abroad. Despite Taiwan's strong human rights record, there are still areas where improvements can be made. This is particularly true when it comes to transnational issues, ranging from the treatment of foreign workers to Taiwan's lack of a national asylum system. Additionally, the Asia-Pacific is the only region without a regional human rights mechanism, highlighting the crucial lack of a regional framework to address these issues. Over the next hour and a half, we will discuss several human rights issues in Taiwan, including LGBTQ+ rights, forced labor, and asylum seeking, that have transnational effects and require transnational solutions. Where can Taiwan act as a leader, and what areas can it improve? Are there issues on which the United States can work together with Taiwan to ensure that human rights are being upheld? Or conversely, are there lessons that the United States and other countries can learn from Taiwan? Featuring a representative from the Taiwan Association for Human Rights, this event will host experts on each of these topics with the aim of examining the current state of human rights in Taiwan and pinpointing both Taiwan's successes and challenges to find areas of international cooperation. Before getting started, I'd like to give thanks to the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, who partnered with us to present this event. And now I would like to introduce our panelists. Shih-ting Tina Yo is the director of the Taiwan Association for Human Rights Northern Office based in Taipei. Taiwan Association for Human Rights is a comprehensive rights organization founded in the authoritarian era in 1984. Its focus has since shifted from democratic transition to violations against the universal human rights, including labor rights of migrant workers, forced evictions, use of force during assemblies, and right to seek asylum. It has also earned the Presidential Cultural Award, Social Reform for contributions to society in 2019. Tina's work focuses on the advocacy and education of human rights and connecting the organization with other national and international partners to bring about greater impacts. Before joining TAHR in 2020, she had broad experience in business and human rights. Throughout her career, she has been inspired by the determination of the youth and deeply believes that the world will become better if the younger generation gets more involved in the field of human rights. Dr. Ying-chao is an assistant professor of sociology at the Virginia Commonwealth University. His research interests include sexualities, gender and masculinities, global religions, and inequalities. He will be on the monitor up there. He has published his work in the journals Context, Sexuality Research in China in English, and Gender Equity Education Quarterly in Chinese. His research on military masculinity was published in East Asian Men, Masculinity, Sexuality, and Desire, and Masculinities in a Global Era. His traditional Chinese translation of Maud Humphrey's Tea Room Trade in Personal Sex in Public Places has won the editorship award at the Taipei International Book Exhibition in 2017. He received his PhD in sociology from Rutgers University in 2018. And lastly, we have Jennifer Hong. She is a senior director at the Project 2029 Institute, joining Project 2029 after 10 years of federal government experience. She has worked at the U.S. Department of State and National Science Foundation in various capacities, working on human rights and anti-trafficking issues across Asia and the Pacific Islands, and leading strategic communications in the fields of foreign policy, law enforcement, and science and engineering. She received an MA in public policy from the University of Michigan's Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy and a BA in legal studies from the University of California, Berkeley. And without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to Tina. Tina, the floor is yours. Hello?
Yeah. Today, I'm Yu Shih-ting from Taiwan Association. Today, I'm going to talk about 4 human rights topics that are in the Asia Pacific region human rights mechanism, forced labor and fisheries, refugee war, national I would like to emphasize the importance and urgency of constructing the regional human rights mechanism. Transnational platforms have added security over personal liberty and persons subjected to enforced disappearance war. One of the more high-profile beneficiaries is Ying-chao. Ying-chao was forcibly disappeared by the Chinese government after it entered China via Macau on March 19, 2017. In November of that year, he was given a prison sentence of 5 years under the pretext of subverting state power. His case was the first from Taiwan that was taken up by the United Nations Working Group on enforced or involuntary disappearances, as the perpetrator of China is a member state of the UN. While Ying-chao has returned back home on April 15, 2022, it is reported that there are still 402 cases of Taiwanese, American, Canadian, and Swiss in China, whose circumstances are unknown. The Asia Pacific is the only region without a region-wide human rights accountability framework. Seeing that commerce and human rights should not be treated as separated issues, if Asia Pacific region wishes to prosper and see positive integration of the region's many economies, personal liberties and basic human rights must be guaranteed. It is our belief that a regional intergovernmental mechanism preventing and redressing human rights abuses is dispensable to each and every transnational economic cooperation. Without a doubt, conjoining the strength of the regional civil society actors and international partners in this regard is top priority for the Taiwan government. At the forefront of China's authoritarian expansionism, it would be prudent for Taiwan to partake in the systematization of rights-based perspectives across Asia Pacific and avail of its APEC membership in pushing the incorporation of human rights clause in trade agreements. Enacted in Hong Kong the year before, the Hong Kong national security not only endangers Taiwanese, but also threatens the personal liberty of business persons, students, and travelers entering or transiting from all over the globe. Cases of abduction and arbitrary detention have come into existence. Bottom line, the Chinese government should ensure in all circumstances respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms in accordance with the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and other international human rights instruments signed or ratified by China. And moving on to the next topic, forced labor and fisheries, which has gradually been recognized as a form of human trafficking. Fishers interviewed by Greenpeace reported either experiencing or observing at least one forced labor indicator as defined by the UN's International Labour Organization, which is called ILO, with the most common abuses being excessive overtime, while almost all reported that their wages had been withheld. The living and working conditions as harsh and their identity documents illegally retained. As of now, the action plan for human rights in the fishery industry submitted by the Council of Agriculture of the Taiwan government fails to uproot the bifurcated system discriminating between offshore and inland recruitment that brings about most structural injustices permeating the industry. Thus, we hold on to our appeal for a uniform application of the Labor Standard Act and Employment Service Act to offshore and inland recruitment alike. Notwithstanding the fact that the Council of Agriculture is the nominal competent agency for the fishing industry, the Ministry of Labor should have taken a greater role in building interagency coordination as the administrator of labor affairs. A genuine determination on the part of the government to combat labor trafficking entails extension of official mandates, implement of the ILO Work in Fishing Convention, negotiation with the fisher's country of origin, and standardization of employment contracts. Additionally, we call for stakeholders from the U.S., such as the Bumblebee Foods, with its leading market share among the canned seafood chain, to trace its supply chain in realizing its human rights social responsibility and filling the void of Taiwan's legislative efficiency regarding corporate accountability. Seafood company profits of asymmetrical relation that renders fishers vulnerable to human rights abuse, and thus are expected to monitor its supply chain in preventing illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. U.S. seafood company Bumblebee, one of the leading companies in the canned tuna market, and its Taiwanese parent company Fengchi, Formosa Fishery Company, which is FCF, one of the top 3 global tuna traders, play an important role in the global tuna industry and thus hold responsibility over health of our ocean and the treatment of those working in the tuna supply chain. As the authority to the world's largest seafood importers that can wield significant leverage over reducing forced labor at sea, the U.S. government is well positioned to propel Bumblebee and other seafood companies to take immediate action in fixing inadequate policies over its supply chain. Another starting point would be downgrading Taiwan to Tier 2 in the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking in Person report, based on findings of human rights organizations regarding Taiwan government's failure to meet the minimum standards as set forth in the Torture Victims Protection Act. Next, in regards to the precarious situation of asylum seekers in Taiwan, TAHR has been advocating for asylum systems since 2013 and is the only organization providing legal assistance to asylum individuals. In 2022, we received asylum requests from Ukraine, Uyghur, and Myanmar. Same year, civil society organizations lost a legal battle against the deportation order issued to 6 Tibetans originating from Nepal and India in the administrative court. Last year, several Afghans reached out to us for possible fleeing and entry plan. A number of Uyghur students from Ethiopia were looking for a pathway to residency after their current visa expired. All demonstrate that however far it is that Taiwan is located away from the country of conflicts and large-scale displacement, Taiwan will be influenced and Taiwan has the responsibility. What every fellow communist might be more familiar with is the fact that some Hong Kong young protesters choose Taiwan to be their exiling destination after the pro-democracy movements and the following legal crackdown. It says approximately 200 people have claimed asylum in Taiwan. However, what I also learned is not everyone ends up staying. A major obstacle to all asylum seekers wishing to seek protection in Taiwan is that Taiwan lacks any kind of refugee regulations. Taiwan doesn't have a national asylum system, nor is it bound to the Refugee Convention and Protocol. Meanwhile, the marginalization of Taiwan by United Nations and affiliate organizations cut the resources available to other countries that either have no national law. The consequences is profound. Despite being held as the beacon of human rights and democracy in Asia, Taiwan authority doesn't or is unwilling to process asylum seekers and to provide asylum. The aforementioned individuals either left Taiwan in desperation or stayed but with a different type of visa and reason irrelevant to asylum. A Uganda lady who fled persecution against her sexuality had waited for 7 years before the government finally, with discretion. In respect of Hong Kong, there is a separate regulation applicable and a temporary budget aimed to settle down Hong Kong asylum seekers. However, it remains unclear of the project's lifetime, operation, and accountability. What delays the enactment of a refugee law? It could be concluded in the following factors: the potential threats of national security and Chinese infiltration, the prejudice and stereotypes against refugees and their arrival, and the subtle but extensive hostility towards people of color. These concerns both the government and the society, and in the reverse, serve as excuses for the authority to justify its failure to protect refugees that are already in the territory. Then I'd like to address family reunion rights. While Taiwan has been hailed as the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage as of 2019, the executive rigid application of the Act determined the choice of law impedes registration of transnational same-sex marriage, insofar as the only country at which the foreign party bears nationality prohibits such union. The Act in its current form discriminates against LGBT plus of certain nationalities, which is not in line with the UN human rights related covenants adopted by Taiwan in 2009. Currently, there has been 4 court rulings favoring the registration of transnational same-sex marriages. Nonetheless, without a revision to relevant administrative directives, transnational same-sex couples have few alternatives but to filing a judicial review for favorable interpretation of the law on a case-by-case basis. The unavailability of a spouse visa is detrimental to their lives and livelihood, triggering anxiety over uncertainties. We urge Taiwan government to expedite a proposed law amendment to enable all cross-national same-sex couples to register their marriage in Taiwan. That's all for the supranational issues introduction that part concerns recently. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tina. I'm just laying everything out so well. I think that all of these issues are very important, not only the problem of a lack of a regional framework, but also fisheries and asylum seekers, and going into the problems with same-sex marriage that Taiwan has yet to address. I have some questions for you, but I will leave that until after all of our panelists have spoken. So I would like to now turn the floor over to Dr. Yu Chanukau, who will talk more about LGBTQ plus rights and more about how this relates to transnational issues.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? Can you hear me and see my slides?
We can hear you, but
the slides are a little bit small, unfortunately, but we can hear you.
Okay, hopefully the online audience can see that better. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. This is my first time to be invited to talk at the GTI, and that is my great honor to join this wonderful community. I'm Dr. Ying-chao Gao, Assistant Professor of Sociology at VCU, only 2 hours driving away from you at DC. So today, I want to introduce myself with my different hats that I bring into the area about the transnational human rights issue, from the gender sexuality perspective. I'm a working class background child, who was born and into the working family. Then I'm also an openly gay. I have been joining the LGBTQ activism in Taiwan and now globally 20 years ago. I have been trained as a sociologist, and I'm also converted myself as a Christian and also a Taiwanese like transnational Asian scholar. Well, why I tell you so many hats I'm wearing? Because based on the feminist pedagogy and the starting point theory, it is very important to expose one's own biases, but also the vantage points that we bring into the human rights issue and to make the world better. So today I prepared some talking points. We will see how much time do I need and do I have. Then I will start with some numbers, to give people a glance about the Taiwan's position in the global gender sexualities landscape. I will also focus on the LGBTQ inclusive curricula that Taiwan can provide to the global LGBTQ inclusive education. And my wonderful panelist has addressed Taiwan as the first Asian country to legalize its marriage. And I will address more intersectional perspective in terms of gender, race, and the ethnic backgrounds that has been surrounding with this issue. And if I still have time, I will talk about how indigenous nations may participate in making the gender and sexuality more equal. So I believe many fellows here are very familiar with many global democracy indexes, from the Freedom House, etc. And Taiwan has been put on the top tier of all hundreds of countries. But I see less people use another index called GII, which is Gender Inequality Index. So this is an index created by the UN Development Program beginning in 2010. This GII index measures the state of gender inequality in countries around the world by analyzing 5 indicators in the 3 dimensions, including health, empowerment, and labor market. So in GII global ranking, the top one is Switzerland. But you can see on my screen, oh, did I share? Sorry. I think share the wrong screen. You should see my keynote, right? All right, so that's the good one. So if you can see on my screen, Taiwan was ranked at the top 6 right after Switzerland, Denmark, and Sweden. And actually, Taiwan is the top 1 in Asia. The GII, the lower number is greater, so which means the Taiwan's GII is smaller than the South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and China for sure, and also United States. So if you can see, if Taiwan was part of the UN members, Taiwan will be at the bottom right-hand side of this GII index, which means Taiwan had the globally lowest global gender inequality index. Then if we break it down, Taiwan did better in the areas includes the maternal mortality rate and adolescence birth rate. The lower is better, but you can see Taiwan was relatively lower in those 2 categories compared with United States and other East Asian countries. Then Taiwan's the female proportion at the parliament is globally high, at roughly 40%, at the comparable level with Switzerland, compared with the United States at roughly a quarter of the parliament seats, and that is also much higher than the proportions in South Korea and Japan. But Taiwan can do better in terms of the empowerment. For example, the female and the male participation and receivement in the second tier educational area. And Taiwan's the labor market's force participate rate could also have the improvements room. Many of you may be familiar with this map. On the map, drawn every year by the Yoga World, Taiwan's on this map, if you see the darker blue, that means the LGBTQ rights, it's much better in terms of the legal landscape. Taiwan was marked as the second tier of the darker blue, which means it's a country that provides the broad protection to the LGBTQ citizens. And the countries that were marked by the red or even the darker red means it's a country that still use the law or penalty, even up to the life sentences to punish people who have the homosexual behaviors. So you can see Taiwan is doing much better than its Asian countries, the neighbors. So in the New York Times, Taiwan was praised as the beacon for Asian gays, and Taiwan was also the first Asian country to legalize same marriage. And I will address more about the 同志 LGBTQ education in the following section. Because I found, in the transnational human rights issues, actually the educational rights are very important, but receive not enough attention. So I want to read one quote for you. It's the quote from UN Human Rights 2019, quote, bullying, harassment, and exclusion of LGBTQ people in educational institutions is a worldwide problem faced by a significant proportion of LGBTQ students. It is often driven by stigma, prejudice, rooted in deep cultural beliefs about gender roles, masculinity, and femininity. LGBTQ students face teasing, name-calling, public ridicule, rumors, intimidation, pushing and hitting, stealing or damaging belongings, obscene notes and graffiti, social isolation, cyberbullying, physical and sexual assaults, and even death threats. This occurs in classes, playgrounds, toilets, and changing rooms, on the way to and from schools, as well as online. So this is one of the urgent problems at the transnational and global levels. But let's think about what are the solutions currently provided by the modern countries. In the United States, based on one of the recent studies, in the United States, only 7 states that had a state law or regulatory guidelines requiring LGBTQ inclusive sex education. Other 5 states require information about the sexual orientation and gender identity that either affirms or discriminates against LGBTQ people. But actually, there are many other states who ban the LGBTQ related instruction or reconsolidate the heteronormativity or relative traditional ideology. In recent years, actually, in 2019, the Scotland in UK claimed it is the first country in the world to add LGBTQ history to school curricula. But however, I want to ask here in the Taiwanese-centered scope, is Scotland really the first country to add LGBTQ plus history to school curricula? I argue no. Actually, no. On LGBTQ education, Taiwan can also help. Taiwan has legalized national 同志 LGBTQ inclusive education since 2005. But ironically, at the global level, we barely talk about education, including LGBTQ education. So that's why I want to spend more time to address this point. Actually, currently in Taiwan this year, Taiwan's law had 11 laws that includes sexual orientation and gender identity into its own protection in the areas of culture, health, family and marriage, data security, and employment and workplaces, including the educational area. So actually, Taiwan shows a very different way to add LGBTQ inclusive subjects into the educational system. When I organized and prepared this presentation with our wonderful organizer, Andre Wu. Wu's reaction teaches me in the way that some people in this area may consider education is a domestic issue. But I argue actually Taiwan can help in the way to see actually education could be both a national and transnational issue in the way to learn from the Taiwanese perspective. So for example, in the American educational system, the educational policies tend to be decided by the very local or even domestic levels at the school district level or the state level. But Taiwan include the LGBTQ protection into the educational system at the national level that apply to all countries, counties and cities in the Taiwan's territory. And Taiwan did not include LGBTQ subjects as a sexuality subject or only under the umbrella that we call the sex education. So in the Taiwanese educational system, 同志教育, the LGBT subject has its own educational territory. And you know what? 同志 as the term is the second popular term that has been used widely in the global Asias, that only second to the umbrella term in English called queer. So under this context, Taiwan has included LGBTQ inclusivity since the establishment of gender equity education in 2004, and the enactment law specifically talk about LGBTQ inclusive education should be incorporated into the gender equity education. But you can see, throughout the campaign fighting for the marriage equality, the inclusive education was also used by the conservative backlash to push back this kind of progressive legalization. But thanks to the conservative opposition, now in 2022, Taiwan's enforcement rules for the Gender Equity Education Act unpack the contents of LGBTQ education to see specifically that the gender equity education in Taiwan should include sex education, different genders, gender characteristics, gender parameters, gender identity, and sexual orientations, etc. This graph is a little bit detailed, but I want to read out loud for you because I found whenever I talk to my American students or my international friends, they were so amazed by how detailed and how structured Taiwan's curricular guidelines and the structure has been provided to educate students about the LGBTQ sensitivity and the gender consciousness. So on the graph, the grader 1 to grader 6, based on the current GEE substantial content, students in Taiwan in the elementary school, they need to learn how to understand the diversity of biological sexes, sexual orientations, gender characteristics, and gender identities. For the students enrolled in the junior high school, the graders 7 to 9, students need to learn how to accept one's own and other people's sexual orientation, gender characteristics, and gender identities. For the senior high school students, the high school students here, they need to learn how to recognize one's own and respect others' sexual orientation, gender characteristics, and gender identities to transcend the gender limitations of individual development. All these kind of progressive curricular guidelines could be possible because we have a wonderful Gender Equity Education Act that regulates the state and the schools should now discriminate against students and employees based on their own gender identity and the sexual orientation, and to actively provide the curricula and activities to serve the LGBTQ identified students. So I prepared some examples for you. Those are the textbooks pages provided by the senior high school text. You can see the gender and the sexuality has been taught as the structure, as the spectrum that has been shifting and that did not belong to the different categories. So if you are interested about those examples, welcome to ask more questions during the Q&A. How many minutes do I still have?
think you're still okay for maybe 5 more minutes.
That would be wonderful. Great, thanks. All right, so my wonderful panelist has addressed Taiwan's progress on the marriage equality issues, and I want to add another racial and decolonial perspective. You know what? I found a double standard that has been imposed on Taiwan, and from roughly Euro-American centric perspective. Why so? Because actually, most of the Euro-American newspapers tend to expand and to focus on Taiwan's progress on sexist marriage, but tend to ignore other two progressive bills that Taiwan has initiated as early as 2012. So in addition to marriage equality bill, actually Taiwan's LGBTQ activism has been raised other two bills, including the pansexual partnership and the polyamorous multi-person household. Although those two bills did not proceed at the parliament in Taiwan, but actually those are the progressive reimagination about the new types of the family and the marriage. So I believe that issue should be better addressed and to talk more about so-called democratization of intimacy. With that said, the marriage equality legalization in Taiwan is highly gendered. I mean, compared with the United States data, although right after the legalization of same-sex marriage in the US in 2015, the lesbians in the US tend to use more the marriage equality rights at the 54% compared with gay men's 46%. In Taiwan, roughly 2/4 of the lesbian couples who are the beneficiaries of the legalization of same-sex marriage, on top of only 1/4 of gay men. So I will wonder, I will argue that marriage equality legalization, learning from the Taiwanese perspective, it is not only a LGBTQ issue, it is also a woman's issue and a gender issue, because many women in Taiwan need to put together their own resources and to get away from the patriarchal families by marrying each other into the same-sex marriage. That's the way that they can escape from the patriarchal domination. Then, Taiwan's marriage equality experiences also sheds light on a very different relationship between religious freedom versus LGBTQ rights. We understand in American political landscape, those two issues seem at the far right and far left ends of the political spectrum, right? But actually, Taiwan's experiences are very different because Taiwan is a country that legalizes and also tolerates many diverse religions. So you can see from the Buddhist marriage and to the Taoist beliefs, there are many LGBTQ supportive and protective goddesses that are aligned with the marriage equality issue. So perhaps Taiwan could be another mothership for the religious freedom in the non-American way, and to see how religious diversity can also help to push forward the LGBTQ protective human rights. Then finally, I would say, we need to use a very decolonial perspective to reconsider the human rights issues that we discuss here. 2 centuries ago, American and the European missionaries came to the US, came to the East Asia, and they consider homoerotic relationships prevalent in East Asia was backward, conservative, and promiscuous. But now, after 2 centuries, in the 21st century, the United States and the European countries that legalize marriage and to do other LGBTQ rights, they seem to hold the same standard to evaluate the overseas countries to see what is more modern, what is more progressive. But I would say Taiwan can also shed light on another decolonial perspective, along with other Asian and the global southern countries, that can talk back to the global northern country to say, actually, we have different history and culture that can be evaluated for the human rights on the LGBTQ and women's issue. Finally, I want to address Taiwan's LGBTQ issue and gender sexuality issues has been highly related to with another prominent issue in the global human rights landscapes, including the racial, ethnic, and indigenous nations. Recently in Taiwan, there's a rise of a new movement called the Adu activism. So Adu is Taiwan people's language is the term to co-sister among the cisgender men who have the male femininity, like a sissy boy or the effeminate boy. But they use the sisterhood due to reclaim their own power of gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nationality, along with other dimensions. So, so LGBT issue provided by Taiwan can be also used as another platform to push forward the indigenous rights and the self-identification to balance between the traditional revival versus the LGBT progressivism. And nowadays in Taiwan, hundreds of new gender and sexual identities has been translated or recreated to broaden the horizon of the gender and sexuality landscape in Taiwan. And more people are trying to use the decolonial perspective to think about how can we carefully discuss the meanings and limitations of queer concepts while contextually appreciating the variations in political strategies, human rights, and queer politics in Taiwan, in global Asia, and in all the global South. Thank you so much for your listening. And I know there's a rush to cram many pieces of information here. I look forward to more conversation during our Q&A section. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving us such an informative view of LGBTQ rights in Taiwan at this moment. I learned so much about gender inclusive education from Taiwan. So thank you for really showing how important this is, and also speaking on how important this is for women and gender rights, and also highlighting the connection of religious diversity in pushing forward LGBTQ advances. So I would next like to turn to Jennifer Hong, who will be talking more on maybe a think tank perspective, so we can kind of bring this all together. So Jennifer, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Hong. Senior Director with Project 2049. I just want to thank the Global Taiwan Institute and Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for the opportunity to be here today and for hosting such a forum that is so important for us to talk about this issue. I want to start with a broad statement, which I think the transnational crime hurt our world and our society. It damages the fabric of democracy and erodes human dignity. In this day and age, when we are faced with war in Ukraine and protests in Iran and daily provocation in the Taiwan Strait and the places around the world, it is our duty to step up and think proactively about how we protect the human rights, the fundamental rights that are given to us. Transnational crimes thrive in that chaos, the chaos of today, and transnational criminal actors systematically exploit the gaps and differences of law enforcement, the capability and the capacity of different countries, and they exploit that. And we, as people of nations that care for justice and transparency, rules-based order, and we should align together to fight and to combat transnational crimes. So pivoting to today, I think that we have many to celebrate in the world, and due to important players like Taiwan. We know that in the recent past, that was not the case, that Taiwan was in the forefront of respecting human rights. And as our panelists have mentioned, there are several things that we can celebrate. And I think that it's important for us to pause and remember some of the amazing progress that has been made. Of course, some of the information that was already shared, the first Asian country to legalize gay marriage, elected a female president before the United States. It's expecting an 8th direct election in 2024 of their president and the vice presidency, and we're expecting a smooth transition of power there. I know we talked about the Freedom House 4, as well as just the continued advances that were made in indigenous rights, student movements, and peaceful gathering, and so forth. My connection to transnational crimes have been when I was at the State Department working on human trafficking issues, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Forced labor, I think, is a synonymous term. So I apologize if I keep on using trafficking and not use the word forced labor enough, but it's been ingrained in me in the years of working at this office. So my office was responsible for producing the yearly Trafficking in Persons report, and Taiwan was one of the many countries that I covered in that report, and had the privilege of traveling to Taipei many times and other places in Taiwan. While I was there, I met with government leaders, judicial members, law enforcement, civil society, even victims in Taiwan, and just really got to see a nation go from, frankly, an ignorance and denial of this crime to maybe even contrition and to commitment. And what I have realized and still appreciate and still stand out to me very distinctly is the humility in which the Taiwan authorities have approached this issue. So when I joined the State Department to work on this issue, Taiwan was about 2 to 3 years after they were at the brink of being downgraded to Tier 3. And so they had a very focused effort to really look at this crime very differently, once again, from denial to realizing and recognizing that this is an issue in their nation. When I had worked with them, so 2, 3 years out, still very early, but they had several things that they could celebrate. So one is that they had enacted and implemented a new law that criminalized all forms of trafficking with stringent sentences and penalties. And that's really important because that demonstrates to us that they weren't just creating a law to have it just for show, but that they were going to use it and they were going to take the issues of human trafficking very seriously. And by then, there had been a conviction or two using that new law, which demonstrated to us that they, once again, were taking this issue seriously. I have been to several conferences where I've seen the vice president show up, heads of ministry, at all the highest level to the bureaucracy, signaling their willingness to fight and combat human trafficking. Where that humility came from was the shortcomings. They recognized the shortcomings. For every small incremental progress that they made, they realized there were 10 more that they needed to navigate and needed to improve. But humility in recognizing that, that was such a breath of fresh air in my time at the State Department working with Taiwan authorities. And I still look back to those days and fondly remember just the amount of willingness to work on this issue. Since then, I do want to recognize some of the significant progress that Taiwan has made on human trafficking issues. In 2021, they have convicted more traffickers than ever before in the years past, and protected more victims and provided more victim protection services. They have also improved their victim-centered approach in providing identification procedure to case management, and have formalize their effort with NGOs so that they are providing better services to their victims. I don't actually remember how I ended up in the situation, but when I was there in one of the trips, law enforcement had suspected some foul activity on a fishing vessel. And what they did was they recognized that it may be victims of trafficking. And so they brought them off the ship. And immediately an NGO was brought in, and they were in the room doing the interviews together. Now, I'm not saying the entire process was perfect, and I'm sure if I talk to different people, there's something that the law enforcement probably didn't do well or perfectly. But I just want to take a moment to recognize that the Taiwan authorities had educated their law enforcement officers to know that it could be an issue. And then they brought the victims or potential victims and then brought in civil society to be part of that conversation. It's so easy for us to look at where the end state and not appreciate kind of the progress that Taiwan has steadily been making in the field of human trafficking. Another big area of improvement that I have seen, and still a long way to go, is in the broker abuse. Recruitment broker abuse continues to exist in Taiwan. I have learned that it has become an unfortunate part of the ecosystem or the economy. I've talked to the brokers themselves, the employers who hire them to bring the migrant workers who have been abusing the system, as well as migrant workers who have not been abusing the system, but are fully aware of many others who've been abusing that system. This nation had gone from denial to, oh, those are just few bad apples. They're just few bad actors in this system. It's not a systemic problem. To today, they recognize that this is an issue. Do they still have a long way to go? Absolutely. But today they have convicted more recruitment brokers than in the past. That shows that they have recognized that this is an issue. You had mentioned tier 2, so I'm going to push back a little bit. Tier 1 basically means they met the minimum, the bare minimum as a nation to combat trafficking in person in their country. So they've prosecuted, they have protected victims, and they're doing their best to prevent it. Beacon of democracy got mentioned several times. When I think of beacon of democracy, not as because I think of Taiwan as a beacon of democracy, not because it's a nation that has reached a perfect state and is in a perfect state, but rather I have seen government officials, civil society challenge, push, pull, that vibrant interaction that I've seen in Taiwan. I think that's what makes Taiwan a vibrant democracy. But you're right, there is a long way to go. And so certain things that I would like to mention, and thank you for mentioning forced labor on fishing vessels, that continues to be a very, very difficult issue, just because the fishing vessels in the distant water fleets that are far away, difficult to track, difficult to get on board the ships, to identify how people have gotten in there. And by the nature of their work, I mean, it's already a very intolerable working condition. It's a very difficult work in the best of circumstances. So the way people are recruited into the fishing vessels to held captive there. And you mentioned, underpayment or in the wages being withheld, their identities being confiscated so that they can't just leave. I mean, there's a host of issues, and I think the government can do more to increase education, increase inspection, and we don't have to go into detail on this, but flag of convenience. Taiwan-owned vessels are flying not just the Taiwan flags, but of other nations with weaker law, and so they're evading justice and law enforcement by not flying the flag of Taiwan. So that is something that I think that the government still has a long way to go to tackle. Another one is specific lack of specific labor law. As the nation gets wealthier, as more educated, there are more migrant domestic caregivers entering the nation. And because there is no specific law that protects these migrant workers, caregivers specifically, a lot of thousands of caregivers are left vulnerable to forced labor. I won't go into asylum system. What I will say is I understand, I've talked to the fear that an island nation, a wealthy island nation with limited resource and space think when they think about asylum and bringing others onto the island. I don't think that's a good enough reason, but I know that it should be encouraged to look in asylum issues and think about what is a good policy for Taiwan. And last but not least, vigilance on brokers. Just because I understand that it's part of the ecosystem doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way. And I think that there's a lot more that the country can do to look at their broker ecosystem and see how they can protect the abuses that are happening with that. But I will end with that I do remain hopeful. When I worked on human trafficking issues many, many years ago, it wasn't even on many people's radar. People just assumed that was just the way of life. And so the fact that, yes, the UN report took a very long time to come out, but it did come out. And just a few days ago, the United States, Canada, Denmark, Sweden, maybe some of those nations have called on the Human Rights Council to call to debate what's happening in Xinjiang, with calling China out. And it is a permanent security member, and that has not happened in the past. Second thing is nations are taking their own measures. So Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, designed to prevent U.S. companies and consumers from implicitly buying products that are made with forced labor. Implementation is messy. I recognize that. I know the business communities are very upset. But I appreciate this, the congressional leadership for being steadfast and saying you knew about this issue. It's your responsibility to fix it. And that I just hope that this will be one of many efforts and acts in the near future that protect our supply chain and to really eradicate forced labor from the supply chain of all sectors. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So I will start with my moderator questions, but we will also be accepting questions from the audience. So please feel free to send them in the YouTube chat online. So we'll do 15 minutes of moderator questions, and then we will allow audience members to ask questions as well. So first off, I would like to talk about what both Jennifer and Tina mentioned, so about downgrading Taiwan to Tier 2 status. in the U.S. Department of State's Trafficking of Persons report. So I would like to ask both of you, after Taiwan is downgraded, what changes will happen, and what is the importance of downgrading Taiwan to Tier 2, in your opinion?
You go first, or should I? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
What Jensen mentioned was the Taiwan government is from denial to recognize this issue, but they already stay in Tier 2 for too long, so which means even it's a minimum standard, they already done their part. So they do not they don't have the motivation to improve any of the law amendment or other policies to apply to these, whatever is domestic caregiver workers or fishery workers. So if the downgradings really happen, that would mean it is a more clear message that this is not enough. You have to act more.
All right, well, you're pitting us against each other here. That's a tough one for me because, yes, we evaluate a country for their capacity and capabilities based on their economic and social standing. And so, yes, I have to look at Taiwan for what by itself. So let me go back to what I used to do, and I am worried that it will be counterproductive. I agree with yes, it may trigger something for the Taiwan authorities to step up in all of these areas that you and I agree are still lacking. What I do know is that there's a diligent effort that's continually happening. So I think it'll be more perplexing and confusing for the Taiwan authorities to just be downgraded because it's not about the end state of where we are, but rather the progress that the nation is continually making. So I just think that it'll be more discouraging and confusing if we downgrade it at this juncture. And if I may add one more, there is the reason I've been to Taipei several times and interacted with the authorities is because every year we make it a point to go out and engage with these countries. So we're not sitting at our desk writing this report, but rather we go and engage every year. And so there's an opportunity for the U.S. State Department to continually engage with them to make that progress. And I assure you, within the State Department, we may be the most unpopular office because we don't care about the national security and the economics or other issues, and we are singularly focused on human trafficking. We are your best allies to get the message across to the Taiwan authorities. And so you would lose that channel of government to government conversation if we, in my mind, arbitrarily or to create some kind of momentum down there.
So for the next question, I'd like to ask Ying-chao, so Dr. Gao. As you noted, so we talked about gender equity education in schools and how the U.S. can learn from Taiwan in these ways. But you also mentioned some conservative pushback against this education. So could you elaborate more on some of the barriers that face gender equity education? And do you have any recommendations for policymakers, either in Taiwan or the U.S., in addressing these specific barriers?
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful question. And actually, I'm not sure if Andrea and everyone is aware that I'm writing a book about the transnational network of anti-LGBTQ conservative movements flowing between Taiwan and the US. Then I stepped into the field, actually to study why there's a conservative backlash against the gender equity education. But ironically, I found my ethnography was occupied by the marriage equality issues throughout the following days. So it seems like the marriage issue and the educational issue were back and forth, under the conservative radars as the what we call the wedge issue to mobilize the conservative voters, in favor of their own politicians' elections. Taiwan can provide several experiences, to the American and the global communities in terms of how to emancipate or, to include LGBTQ subjects into the educational system. The first one, I feel it's very important to have all the stakeholders or all the people who share the educational interest involved deeply into the procedures, from the curricular guideline design to the making of the textbook to the instruction and the curricular execution. Why I'm saying so? Because actually, I'm physically in Virginia, and we know that the Virginia just turned to the Republican side, in the last wave. And one of the issue is the controversies created by so-called the critical race theory that the Democrat candidates try to not allowing the parents participants into the educational procedure. But Taiwan's experiences shows a very different path. So at the beginning, that was a trickle-down policy in the first decade for sure. But throughout the conservative backlash, we experienced the history that is more dialectic or dialogic in the way that the people talk to each other across the aisle. Then if we can have all the parents, teachers, and the students' voices being heard and incorporated into the policy-making procedure, that is one of the winning strategies to have a more progressive gender and sexuality sensitivity curricula and education. And another point is, I will encourage everyone to think out of the countryside boxes. So whenever I teach about the decolonial theory to my students, I will always encourage them to think out of the American-centric box. And in sociology, we have a term called the methodological nationalism, which means sometimes the data and the theory that we use has been confined with the national borders. But throughout more than 3 decades of the globalization and transnationalism, many ideas, bodies, ideologies, institutions has been flying across the national borders. So do our education. So Taiwan has a huge emphasis on incorporating the global landscapes of gender and sexual progresses into the own educational system. So I also encourage the American educators or the global advocate for the educational rights also to think across the national borders and to learn from the Taiwan and other Asian or the global Southern experiences.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I do think it is very important to think beyond these country borders and to look at these wider issues. And I think your upcoming book will probably be of much interest to all of us here. So we'll be anticipating that. So I have one more question for Jennifer, although also Tina, if you would like to answer it as well, then feel free to. So I would also like to think about linking together commerce and the economy and human rights issues. So how can the United States help work together with Taiwan to address issues of human trafficking or human rights through these type of frameworks? Is there a role that the U.S. gender-specific economic framework or Chinese New Southbound policy should be taking to address human trafficking in connection with economic policies?
I think the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is going to just be the beginning of many efforts that combine human trafficking with supply chain. So forced labor is part of our supply chain, whether we want to admit it or not, from the raw materials to the final product that you receive, or raw materials to product to the services that you receive. You're better off starting that conversation with there is forced labor in that, right? And so countries to ask those questions about what is in our supply chain, how the layers, different layers, as from raw materials to products, how can we target and look at the issues of forced labor is, I think, the best way for us to look at it. There have been many movements and activities in the past, but it hasn't hit as hard as the Uyghur, the Forced Labor Prevention Act. And that's why it's exciting for me to see human rights and economic policies come together And I think that there's a little bit more of an other interest. I think China is involved in that. And so I think that makes it a little bit easier. And that's why I want the United States and Taiwan to look beyond not just an issue of China, which is a huge issue. So yes, continue to target and continue to expose the abuse that's happening, but continue to look at other nations and the other supply chain across all the sectors to eradicate forced labor in the supply chain. It's the best way to go.
I think we can go through the during the not only academic thing, and as long as your product is not with our standard, then there should be an important response to this, like in our country. I think that would be a more effective way to make sure that all the measures according with the.
Can I add one to that? And absolutely, it's important for corporations to recognize that there is forced labor in their supply chain. But I think that also comes to consumers as well. Consumers have to be willing higher price, right? If things, when we are using clean labor, then your products will be more expensive. How often do we walk into a store and see $1 difference or 50-cent difference between two very similar products, and you don't ask these questions, you just go for what's cheaper, and it's cheaper for a reason, right? Whether the material is cheaper or the labor that went into creating that material or that product was cheaper. And so the consumer has to be the consumers have to be willing to take on that cost as well, not just the corporations. Because corporations are going to make decisions based on the consumers' decisions, right? And in the markets.
Both of you brought up some really good points, and it will be exciting to see how the Uyghur Protection Act is enforced later on, and how that affects human rights and also the economy as well. So I'll just ask one question, which I would like to address to all of our panelists. And then I will open up to any audience questions. So any audience members, if you're interested in asking a question, get your question ready. So the last question that I would like to ask is there the possibility of Taiwan being a regional leader and improving human rights in nearby countries in, for example, East Asia, Southeast Asia, etc.? To what extent would other countries be open to this in the region? And is this a role that Taiwan is able and willing to take on?
He doesn't. I'll go if we.
Dr. Gao, would you like to respond to that question?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my quick answer will be, well, on the LGBTQ issues, Taiwan has been a regional leader and a global leader already. Well, to share a funny story, before the LGBT issue becomes transnationalized, at the global level, actually, because many the pressure, stigmatization, and discrimination that has been imposed on other non-Taiwanese Asian friends. So many, very, very few delegates, from Asia could be invited to join the UN meetings in terms of the LGBTQ issues. So ironically, when Taiwan didn't have the membership in UN, some of the Taiwan friends or activists, had been invited to join a semi-UN meetings, to speak for Asia. So ironically, it is because the lack of other Asian queers, LGBTQ issues and people to stand out. Taiwan enjoy a larger space and freedom. Yeah, ironically, when China didn't want to make any progress on the LGBT issues, it is still pushed a huge pressure and to expel Taiwan away from the UN nation system. So that kind of debate, is still going on. But I would say Taiwan has been the regional leader and the global leaders on this issue. But I also want to address, because of the progress, of Taiwan in this area, Taiwan's anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ conservative movements are also the regional leaders, ironically. So based on my ethnography, for example, the Taiwan version of the Exodus International, which is the American-produced organization that tried to convert the homosexuals and transgender into the heteronormative heterosexual marriage. And the Taiwanese chapter, along with the Hong Kong chapter, Singapore chapter, and Malaysia chapter, had their own conservative network. And Taiwan has been always ridiculed as, oh, you are the a role model, to drop into that kind of moral corruption from the religious perspective. And ironically, after the legalization of same-sex marriage, Taiwan becomes a leader to export the anti-gay ideology and the conservative rhetorics back to China and back to the North America. So my ethnography is still going on. I found, during the pandemic, when many things going online, Taiwan's conservative becomes expanding their own global impact by using Zoom and the online meeting to teach even Taiwanese and Asian parents in the US how to oppose gay and the trans issue that are going on the American continent. So I want to address both the progressive and the conservative side to say, well, yes, we wish Taiwan to be a regional and global leaders, but the debates are still going on at the regional, national, and the transnational levels. I will stop here.
I would say on the issues of labor trafficking, Taiwan has been a leader in East Asia, the realm, and I would hope that they would continue to work on and combat trafficking in their nation. What I worry is that there's so much noise that's on national security issues that I don't want to say cloud this space because it's a very real threat. And so, but human rights issues not always the first thing that people think about. And in order for other nations to recognize Taiwan as a leader, as it has been on many of these issues, they need to be able to see beyond this daily provocation and their threat to existence, right? And so I worry that it's not because of Taiwan's lack of doing, but rather other nations are going to have a harder time seeing the good work that Taiwan is doing within its border because of this other big threat that's happening in the Taiwan Strait. What I would say is I'm so encouraged by Tina and her colleagues who are doing this work day in and day out, not being distracted by what is happening in the Strait and continually focusing on these 4 issues that you mentioned. And that Taiwan authorities will continue to engage and partner with groups to focus on human rights issues in addition to or in conjunction to the national security issues that's happening.
I think the answer is yes. Taiwan has always wanted to be seen internationally. So I believe we can do whatever we can to reach all those standards and also make some negotiation by the countries that near us. So, but indeed, like 10%, we need alliance. So that will be other countries, they need to pay attention to us, and maybe sometimes they can give us a hand in the transnational.
All right, I would like to ask the audience members now if you have any questions. Yes. My guest is coming around to you. There we go.
That's right. Your aversion to geopolitics, quite frankly. But when we're going to the Xinjiang crisis, I beg you to never refer to it as a Uyghur crisis. It's a Uyghur Kazakh crisis.
Mm.
And you should always and everywhere refer to it as a Uyghur Kazakh crisis. 15% of the people that are detained or forced abortions or moved to factories in eastern China are
Yeah.
Kazakhs.
Yeah.
Why is this important? Because we want to energize Kazakhstan to stop blowing up what's happening to their cousins. And I mean at times literal cousins
Mm.
in China. My question is, when you go to American Indian reservations, it's pretty easy to get a list of grievances from those folks in the United States. When I go to the tribal peoples in Taiwan, what kind of grievance list would I hear from those folks?
I'm not sure if I would go once again. Thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. And it's not only the Kazakhs, there are many minority ethnic groups that are affected, and affected is not even a very strong word, that have been harmed by what's happening in Xinjiang. So thank you for mentioning that. As for the ethnic minorities or the indigenous people, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question. So I will defer that to other members of our panelists. If that is your expertise in indigenous.
In Taiwan, the indigenous rights are still in progress. We still have people that are in protest right in the middle of the Taipei City in the park. They trying to ask the government to leave their rights. They have their homeland have been occupied by the authority. But for now, even they have an act about how to deal with these questions, but it is not in the best interest of indigenous people. So trying to urge the government to take these into consideration.
Could you state your name and affiliation?
Hello, my name is Ken Scalvin from Moderator Questions, Japan private company. So thank you for our presentation today. And I have one comment and one question. So my comment is, actually, I think the Taiwan now become the because the democracy, not only the human rights which you just mentioned, but also I think the traditional justice is very big part of that, and I think you can also allocate of this regard, and this is also domestic issue and also transnational issue because you can see now Japan has a lot of historical issue with South Korea and also Taiwan, and you just mentioned that also the United States can also learn in this regard from Taiwan. So I think you can also advocate this issue to the international society. And my question is, so what is the critical reason for Taiwan to succeed to become the leader of this human rights compared with Japan and the United States? So I mean, why you can have a female top leader before Japan and the US? Do you have any specific difference? I mean, in terms of the historical or cultural aspect compared with the United States or other Asian countries? Thank you.
I think the main reason is we have the atmosphere to discuss about the political issues even within families. And the other thing is the female involvement in politics is growing, but it's still not enough due to the support as well. So, as well as the act that Mr. Rao mentioned before, we started educational related gender. And after that, I think the equality is quite a main concern in every government. The institution, we have this concept in our institution, but before we were in a martial law, so it is not quite reached to the people in Taiwan, but now the society is well recognized about this concept, and we usually encourage every people to not only talk about the politics, but also to attend seminar or speeches in every aspect. So I think once the things or atmosphere is built, it will be much more easier to have like a female leader in the future. I've heard that the Japanese new generation, they have lower interest in talking about political issues. So maybe that is a bit different. Maybe that's the reason why we now have a sorry, in English, the vocabulary did not come off. Sorry.
I would like to add that plurality of just different opinions matter, an experience that a man and a woman experience, and I want to tread that very carefully as we talk about LGBT rights. But an experience that I have and bring to the table, the years of experience, the way I interact with an experience would be very different. And I think having a plurality of voices and opinions, I think is really helpful. Also, I think having a role model who looks like you really does make a huge difference. I'd like my daughter to grow up in a world where she sees heads of states that are both men and women. My friend had mentioned this in passing where she said, I'm so sad that my children will never see a Queen of England now, because if you look at the succession model, right, it's Charles and William and then George, right, and however that the family line goes. And so for a while, our daughters will not see a land or a kingdom or United Kingdom led by a woman. The things that you just take for granted, I think she brought something to United Kingdom in ways that other kings have not in the past. And so I think seeing a role model who looks like you, I think makes a huge difference, whether that's a male or female or a man and a woman. But I think we've had more succession with men. And so I think it's important to see a woman leader in the nation.
I believe women only failed
Would you also like to comment on that as well?
Yes, I want to join this wonderful conversation and to build on all the ideas that my wonderful panelists just built up. I also want to shed light on another two perspectives. One is the cross-national sociological analysis. Another is institutional answers. So to answer this audience members' question, actually based on one of the recent sociological studies at the global level, if people want to fight for the gender or sexual related rights, especially the attitudes toward homosexuality and transgender, there are three major country level factors that significantly increase people's attitudes toward LGBTQ people. The first one, political system need to be democracy. The second one, economic development. with the larger trend is very important because based on the theory called post-materialism, when a country experiences a steady and stable economic development, the country member, we think the people in this country tend not to fight against each other for the resources that are limited, and they tend to be more tolerant to the dissenting voices, the people who do not look like them, because they don't have any like a survival crisis, right? So to that extent, people tend to be more tolerant, including the different people, including the LGBTQ people or other underprivileged people who deserve more constitutional protection of human rights. The third, the macro factor would be a country with no nationally dominating conservative religion. So like, for example, some Muslim countries or the Orthodox Christians, are the third major factors that would systematically reduce people's sexual and gender attitudes toward the progressive side. So those are the cross-national findings. But I can also give you some Taiwanese perspective. I think Taiwan can win in some human rights areas, although we still have a much improvement space to go. But with that said, I think Taiwan experienced two paradigm shifts in the past 2 decades. The first one, actually, if people remember, in the late 2000s, Taiwan used the domestic law to domesticize many international human rights law into its own law, right? Because Taiwan was not a United Nations members, but they tried to align itself with these ideals. But at that decade, Taiwan didn't have enough the national confidence, in terms of the leadership of human rights. But in the recent decades, after 4 waves of the CEDAW review, maybe more waves of the international covenants reviews, Taiwan create what we call the Taiwan model to invite the international scholars and the reviewers into Taiwan. And that's also the way to bring all the progressive ideas and ideologies of human rights into the continent. And Geneva is not only the center of human rights anymore. So the human rights could be transnationally circulates. With that said, I think another key point would be Taiwan incorporate the human rights ideas into its own process of national building. In the U.S., we just treat the United States as the nation for granted and never or barely talk about how to remodify the democratic system. Right? The electoral college versus the popular votes, or should American people have the referendum vote rights at the national level, not only at the state level, but Taiwan as the ambiguous, still evolving, abnormal nation, ironically give itself a larger space, or in the scholarly word, we say it's a liminal space for Taiwan and Taiwan people to reimagine what kind of country, what kind of nation we want. And throughout this debating process, the human rights issue becomes one of the embedment deeply into the Taiwan sensibility of nation identity. And another institutional arrangement throughout this nation building process is around 2009, the amendment of the composition of Taiwan's parliament, the legislations. There are roughly 34 seats that should be allocated to at large, and along with other elected members overseas. So actually the at-large seats give the parties a pressure to nominate more progressive representatives that becomes the facade of the own leading parties. And those at large did not have the pressure of the popular votes, but they can become the spokesperson to speak for more progressive rights. So I believe we need to put together the transnational meta forces along with Taiwan's nation building, along with the institutional factors, to tell a larger story about why Taiwan becomes a regional and global leaders in human rights.
All right, thank you so much for that answer and all these different perspectives. Since we are running out of time, I would just like to ask one last question, which we have got from an online audience member. So maybe we can address this really quickly. I think we had one other audience question as well, so maybe we could take them quickly together and then just address them briefly. So the audience member question online is from Tikwa Twa, asks about the future of capital punishment in Taiwan. You could state your name and affiliation.
Hi, my name is Grace Price. I'm an intern at Audit 2049. And my question is about the migrant fishers and kind of how Taiwanese NGOs are working with maybe Southeast Asian ones. So when privately most migrant fishers are from Indonesia and the Philippines. So when these interactions are happening between the authorities and NGOs, is there Southeast Asian representation? Are they speaking the language? Kind of how is that working out with NGOs in Taiwan with Southeast Asian ones to provide care or kind of like in the background of this kind of stuff? Just kind of curious about that.
So when they were interacting, usually the NGOs would have someone who can speak their language whenever it's Tamil or it's Indonesian. They have also have the language. All that is because some of them were married to Taiwan or they were victims before. Speak to people if this is the case that this victim he wants to interact with the government, but he doesn't know there's NGOs to help. Then I think there's not enough resources for the government to interact with the migrant. Exactly.
She just wanted to know about future capital
For our NGOs, we want this to stop immediately, but for our civil society, every time there's a crime happen, somebody died, the only thing they want to do is that the murderer died. So they don't want to consider what makes the situation go to now. And so we are trying very hard to talk to the audience and talk to the society about why we shouldn't do this.
One thing I would add, I think this is why it's so important for Taiwan to have the formal bilateral relationship with other nations around the world. Other nations have embassy representation in their countries to be able to provide support for their countrymen if they are in their country. So you're in Korea and you have Filipino migrant worker who's in trouble, then you can reach out to the Philippines embassy, right? That is not always the case in Taiwan with the lack of representation. And I think this is a push for why Taiwan should have more formalized bilateral relationship with other nations so that we can provide better support to migrant workers and others who are in Taiwan.
So I would like to bring our session to a close since we have already gone over time. But thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. And thank you so much to our audience members that have joined us as well. The recording of the event will be available on our YouTube channel and also on our website if you would like to look at it later on. And also thank you to Taiwan Foundation for Democracy for sponsoring this event. So thank you very much.